Well, I'm here with Stuart Robertson in New York. Stuart is the SVP of HR for North America for Richemont, and like me, was born in Australia. Hi, Stu.
Yeah. Hey, Matt. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you as well. So, firstly, let's start off. I mean, how are you? And this is obviously a really interesting moment in time, which is why we're having this discussion.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I mean, the actual answer is I think that me, like a lot of people, this multiple crisis has taken us to the end of ourselves, I guess. Stretched us beyond what we thought we were capable of. Taken us, there's been days of tears, days of joys, days of coming together, days of frustration, everything. And I think now, honestly, where we've been here in the United States, not only having come out of lockdown, and actually this week, New York is opening stage 1. So incredibly promising signs. But in the midst of all of this, we have probably the greatest awareness of racial tensions and issues in this country coming to the forefront, and that conversation dominating. And I, for one, am really thankful for that. And I've had to process through that, over the last 10 to 12 days. It's taken us way outside of our comfort zone. It's taken me way outside of my comfort zone as a white privileged man leader. But I'm really thankful for the conversation. Really thankful for the conversation. So we find ourselves nowhere near where we thought we would ever be 3 to 4 months ago. Just really in a totally different place that none of us could have ever expected. That's how I'm doing.
Yeah, what an answer. So, how do you find this moment as an SVP of HR and doing your job in very sensitive time and in a very sensitive area, people?
Yeah. I think the only way I can answer that is, I actually kind of have to start personally on this, Matt. And, I've been through my own journey. I've actually, you're probably aware, I've overseen diversity and inclusion as a part of a previous role that I had in a former organization, and thought that I had a pretty good handle on it. That was an incredibly inclusive organization. I think this is a situation, well, this is a topic that we've been working on probably for 12 months, more intensively. But then I think in this last 10 days, I've really been in a place where I think we don't know anything yet. We're not equipped. I'm, like I said earlier, who am I to be talking about this issue? And I've had to process something I heard on the weekend, which is so helpful to me. There's a big difference between this kind of sense of guilt and a sense of responsibility. And myself, like a lot of people like me, have been battling that. What does it mean to be an ally of the movement? What does it mean to face up to the fact that we haven't done enough? What does it mean to face into that? What does it mean to face into the conversations, to not try to retreat from the conversations, but face into them, knowing you're probably not going to say exactly the right thing, but raising the conversation at the highest levels of the company is what we need to do. And hearing from our people is what we need to do. So I've moved from that sense of who am I to talk about this, to I'm responsible, like every other leader in the organization, and let's get constructive about this. Let's have a meaningful conversations. Let's go to those uncomfortable places. And and I could talk to you about just a couple of things that we've done in response. I know, Matt, when you set this up, one of the topics was how we're innovating in this time. And I have to say, having thought about that, we've certainly learned from it. And what we've really learned is the ability to pivot, and the ability to listen, and the ability to act in a way that makes impact, rather than relying on what I think our profession tends to do, which is big programs, big policies, 12-month projects, big rollout plans. Really move quickly into things that are making impact. And the two things that I think that we've been able to do in the last 10 days, one, we had 12 weeks ago established a weekly conversation with our entire organization where the CEO and I host an unproduced Zoom call. But we actually invite everyone in the whole company. And we tend to get around about 60% of the company attending every week for the last 12 weeks. We allow people to put the questions up on the screen. We don't filter their questions. And you can imagine the questions we've been having. Are we going to restructure? How are we going to pay people? All of those questions. We've just taken them all and had an open conversation. And then when the Black Lives Matter movement really hit the forefront, and when we were confronted with the rage and the fear and all sorts of things that have happened, not only because of that, but because of the protests and people not feeling safe, we already had this forum. And so we've just kept going with that. And we've kept this Zoom call. So last week, rather than me being the host, I was the guest. And we had an open conversation on what are we doing to be more inclusive and diverse in the company. And we had all the tough questions. Why don't we have more representation? I have felt this in the past. I experienced this. But I was so glad for those things to come out, because now what we're doing this week is across the company, we've got about 100 listening sessions that we just put together in a snap. Not a big HR program, but brand presidents and their partners inviting people into a conversation to say what they think. And the point is, we don't necessarily want to give answers in those sessions. We just want to listen to people. And I was thinking to myself, when was the last time we put 100 focus groups together in a week? But that's what we just did. So,
and obviously you're a global citizen. You've worked in Hong Kong, you've worked in Japan, and you've obviously worked through different sorts of industries as well. But now your role's focusing on North America. How do you think this approach has been different in other parts of the world at this time, and sort of looking at what your colleagues have been doing as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. And actually, I'm also part of our Global Diversity and Inclusion Council. So we've been looking at this both from a North American lens and a global lens. I think it's, as an Aussie guy who moved here in 2009, I don't think I had any idea what the issues are here in the US. And it's not until you've really lived here for years and you've had the conversations, and the conversations, of course, the formal conversations, but the friends conversations and you've seen the shows and you've watched the news and you've really lived it for a number of years. I don't think you can fully appreciate it, actually. And what we've found is outside of the US, the questions tend to be much more, and I guess if I split these two, I'm speaking very much still about the issue of racism and inclusion in the US. I could come back to the pandemic for sure. But that has its own expression in lots of different places around the world. And I think the only thing that I've been able to see is there's a tendency to want to put a global approach that answers everything. And in this topic, there is no global answer that answers everything. There's only an intention to be inclusive, and the expression of that needs to be really different in Europe, in Australia, in Japan, in the United States, in Canada, which is different to the United States, in South America, which is different to the United States. So I think what is really highlighted here is you can't put a global program and roll it out to fix the problem. You actually have to empower your regions, not only your regional HR teams, but your regional CEOs to be really leading this conversation and leading the response, and then bubbling that back up at a global level and seeing what resonates and what's common across, but also celebrating the things that are different.
Yeah, so an interesting thought to be thinking about that threading back of different perspectives, and still treating the company as a whole, but actually respecting the differences.
Yeah, and I think, I've done global roles, I've done country roles, I've done regional roles, and I can see all the angles here. And I can see, the first thing you're tempted to want to do at a global level is to put your arms around the problem and to quantify it and to somehow fit it into a presentation that you can give to a senior stakeholder group. But I think we've got to be comfortable with the fact that, our approach is to ask the questions, not necessarily to give the answers. And that means that the answers are going to be quite different. And there's a difference between order and control. And I think this is just, again, highlighting that, giving decision-making as close to the clients and as close to the employee journey as you can is probably a good thing at a time like this.
Yeah, I see a real transition now to HR leaders and business leaders with a mind to people which is obviously a very important ingredient to business success. But
Yeah.
I really see this as a critical time for this to work.
Yeah.
It's not just about the pursuit of business results and having people along for the ride.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember an article, you probably saw it. Maybe it was in The Economist right at the start of all of this. How you manage a pandemic is very different to how you manage a financial crisis. I think we all read that. And I was so glad that I read that at the time, because I think you have to think bifocally. The way that we've been thinking about it is, in this situation, we have to look after our employees in the short term and the long term at the same time. So the financial decisions we're making about how much we can pay them now to keep their living wage is directly related to the cash we're going to have to be able to be an ongoing concern in the long term and have a job for that person in the future. And that's this constant balancing, wrestling, actually. The way that we approached it is to take strong actions very early on anything that's not related to people. And we basically cut everything we could that was not related to a person's job. And we started by saying, we want to preserve jobs. We believe nobody knows where this is going, but we've been doing good work on the organization. And we don't know what the future of the organization is going to be. Hiring a person is going to be as expensive in the future as it always has been. And so we don't want to lose people if we don't have to. But so that means cutting costs everywhere as much as we can. We did that within the first week. I think that at the same time, we were asking questions about safety of our people. We're in a business. For anyone who doesn't know, we own a number of iconic brands: Cartier, Mont Blanc, Van Cleef & Arpels, a number of brands. And so we're largely a luxury retail organization. And having people in the boutique selling, at the time we thought we have to do that, because otherwise how are these people even going to have jobs in the future? But we can't have them in the boutiques if it's not safe for them to be there. And so we very quickly made the decision, let's be safe. Let's close everything down. That was quite a week. I remember that week. But then at the same time, what we did is we quickly pivoted and we said, wait a minute, we're a clientele. Our business, more than anybody's retail business, is about clienteling and about relationships. Why can't we keep those relationships going? And so we did. We very quickly enabled remote selling, where our boutique employees could make sales from their living room. They could text product. They could get in touch with their clients. We had a number of clients who were, ironically doing very well on the stock market and still wanting to be involved. They still had their wife's 21st wedding anniversary to buy something for, and they still had their daughter's 16th, and so they still wanted to buy. And so we quickly pivoted to how do we enable those transactions to happen while keeping our employees safe. I can't give you the numbers because they're commercial in confidence, but I will tell you that e-commerce is very different now than it was in February for us. And it's incredibly promising, the results. And so putting all of these things together, we've actually been able to preserve jobs by and large across the organization. When we look at the industry around us, and they in retail have not been able to. The questions for us next is, of course, what's the medium term? What's the longer term? But we've got to start that question but what's the client going to do in the future, and how are we going to respond to that? Before we ask the economic question, and then we put those two things together and we're bifocal again.
So right now, because we're looking so near term, but at the same time, we obviously have business strategies and vast business strategies with a lot at stake to run. How do you think we get that balance between, really just looking at the last 10 or 12 days and seeing the paradigm has changed yet again, but also engaging in the strategic planning?
Well, I'd love to say I know all of the answers. I can just tell you how we're thinking about it. I think actually we have moved. If you asked me that question a month and a half ago, I would have said, nobody knows anything. We're not even asking those questions right now. We're just focusing on preserving cash. Like, cash is king at the moment, so we're preserving it. I think now we're in a different time, a month and a half later, and we can start to see some trends. And then actually it's funny you mentioned this, because I was having a chat with my team, my leadership team today. We would normally have been in goal setting mode in March and April. And we basically put that on hold. What I'm doing is I'm renting a house in Rhode Island and going on vacation for 5 days to get my head straight after all of this. And I'm going to come back and we're going to get into goal setting, because we think actually that is the right time now to be thinking about for the remainder of the financial year. Except instead of looking at what are the 5 things we're focusing on, we're picking no more than 3 for this year. I can't tell you what they are at this moment, but we're taking 2 out of the 5 away, and we'll focus on 3. And that's a pretty general answer.
No, I think that's sufficient at the moment, and it's good to see you orienting onto a long-term approach, but still marrying that with the immediacy of what's actually in front of us at the moment, and recognizing that you've just been through a very intense period. Stu, the final question before we wrap up, and it'd be very easy to talk to you for a long time. It'd be so interesting to check in the future, because it's such a moving feast. But
yeah,
if you're bringing someone into your team as a HR leader at the moment, what would you be saying to them around how they should be handling their role and making an impact?
We've used the term empathy 100 times more than we normally would have in these last 3 months. I mean, for me, that is the absolute premium. The first thing a person has to do is have empathy. At the moment, I think this is really a time for listening. Listening to what our leaders are struggling with. I really feel like HR at the moment, we have more of a leadership role than I remember in a long time. I find myself and my team, they feel the weight of pretty much the entire COVID crisis and the entire Black Lives Matter movement at the same time on their shoulders as HR leaders. And I'm telling them, to a degree, that's true. You're in the lead, you're in the spotlight. This is the World Series. But it's actually not your burden to carry alone. I think this is a time for really partnering with leaders. And I can tell you that the CEOs of the brands and the head of the CEO of the region and we're just continuing to have all of these conversations around, like, they actually see the role of HR. They see the burden on HR. And for the first time in my career I ever remember, they're telling me, how can I help you guys? How can I as a CEO help you guys? Because you're in the lead. So I would say, this is a pretty rare time. Empathy for your leaders, empathy for the situation, take the lead, but the burden's not fully on your shoulders. And then there'd be all sorts of tactical things, that we'd probably focus on. And that would be around, right now, it'd be around, let's not lose this opportunity for creating an inclusive environment like we've never seen before. Let's look ourselves in the mirror. Let's help our leaders look in the mirror. Let's all come together and capitalize on that. Let's take unconscious bias training way beyond where it's ever been. Let's really capitalize on that. And then let's ask questions. I need my team to be asking questions more than they're giving answers at the moment. They need to be curious. They need to be constantly wondering about what the future is, and then helping to drive leaders through those conversations.
Stuart, thanks very much for your perspectives. Thanks for talking at this time. Stuart Robertson, SVP of HR for Richemont for North America.
It's a pleasure, Matt. Good to see you.